rise of blues dancing, how that happened. Many people will fight with me about the things I'm about to tell you. Some things that we think of as being incredibly obvious, like why we call Lindy Hop Lindy Hop. Incredibly synthetic. Peter Loggins, incredibly common historian today, has tried to find copies of that newspaper that every single one of us know about. We haven't found it. So you should be aware that this is an evolving thing. And that brings us to point 2. What Lindy Hop is has never been set in stone. There are no rules for Lindy Hop. There are steps. You can mess with them. There's no book. The best teacher will tell you to dance in the heart. Lindy Hop is a dance defined by the people who dance it. And as a result, it's constantly evolving, constantly changing. And what Lindy Hop is today is not what Lindy Hop was in the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, or even in the late 90s. And then we have 23. Lindy Hop is not a body of steps. Lindy Hop is not swing out. Lindy Hop is not something that you just do on Wednesday night. Lindy Hop has, throughout its history, an incredibly powerful and rich culture, community. And that's what Lindy Hop is. It's something that reaches into you, something that makes you want to move, something that makes you want to be happy, be joyful, something that changes you. And that's exactly what happened to the first 2 people I'm going to talk about back in the early 80s, when interest in this dance started becoming more prominent. Before we talk about those 2 people, I'd like to set the scene for you a little bit. Lindy Hop is more or less dead for many years, but a number of organizations independently have started becoming interested in the revival culture and the early jazz years. One of those groups was a relatively unknown group of jazz historians and tap dancers called the Swedish Swing Society in Stockholm. Another one of those groups is a group in London called the Jiving Lindy Hoppers that later would produce the incredibly prominent dancer Ryan Francois. Another one of those groups was the Ballroom Dance Center in Manhattan called the Standard Cameron Dance Studio. These people together found an incredibly important swing dancer at the time named Al Minch. Brought him out of retirement, learned how to dance with him. Keep in mind, this is the first real Lindy Hopper any of these people had ever interacted with. None of these people had ever been to a social dance. None of these people had ever had any instructions. They taught themselves from archival footage from this man. But unfortunately, Al Minch died only 2 or 3 years after we met him. And that connection was lost. The Lindy Hop was back where it was previously, without any ties to the past. And that's what these 2 people set out to rectify. They were 2 ballroom dancers from a town in Southern California called Pasadena, named Aaron Stevens and Stephen Mitchell. They had seen Helga Hoffman, they'd seen a day of the races, these incredibly short bits of grainy, black and white, pathetic footage that they were trying to keep themselves at a dance from. But not at all enough to learn the entire volume of dances, bridge and swing. And they began calling up literally every person that they could find in New York who had the names of any of the dancers they could find in these reels. Crossed off one name after another. And they paid dirt when they reached a man named Frank Manning. Now, we talk about Frank Manning a lot, but I'd like to emphasize a few things about this person. Frank Manning is not important because he was the early Lindy Hopper. He's not necessarily the best Lindy Hopper, or he was excellent. Keep in mind, by the time that we met him, he was in his 60s. This is not someone who was going to be dancing at 300 BPM. The reason that Frank Manning is important is he was what tied us to what actually happened on this board. He is what kept us in check with our roots, and he was the one who guided us through this early process. And he was ultimately the person who connected us to other incredibly key figures from the era, notably Norman Miller, who was another dancer from White Lindy Hoppers. Incredibly important, a woman named Dawn Hampton, who was a musician and dancer, who today is still Lindy Hop's greatest performance of Dancing in the Heart. Okay, then that Frankie Manning, Initially, he denied being a Lindy Hopper, said that he was a postman, and that was a dumb part of his life, but they ultimately managed to coach him out, by talking about dancing and apartment and Manhattan. They put on their fastest tape, they're ready to show off their aerial, and within like the first few 8 counts, he shuts the tape off. He's not interested in learning how their aerials and all that stuff. He wants to see their connection. He wants to see what their dancing is like, improvised. And he puts in a famous tape called Shiny Stockings. As many can hear. And the swing movement from there took off. Stephen Mitchell and Aaron Stevens took this back to Pasadena. The scene in California grew. The scene in Manhattan grew. It grew in Stockholm. It grew in London. A tiny, totally insignificant local Swedish event called the Harang Dance Camp brought Frankie Manning out to teach some of the classes. Scenes began to sprout up in Seattle, Chicago, Portland, D.C., around the world. And the time was right. And we know this because outside of this initially very small collection of swing dancers, tap dancers, jazz historians, they began to have a national interest in this style of dance, as exemplified by a few bands who were taking punk, rock, and especially rockabilly music, and mixing it with the earlier swing era style jazz in a form that we call neo-swing. Some of the bands that exemplified this style were bands like Squirrel Nut Zipper, Cherry Pop and Daddies, the Royal Crown Review. And the influence of these bands, in conjunction with a few key pieces of film, notably a wonderfully beautiful corny film called Twinked, which is why I'm an answer, and help from the most unlikely sources, The Gap, and an ad design that sells taxis of all things. Lindy Hop was the main force in the late 90s. He began to send dancers into our arms in such numbers that we literally could not hold them. Let me give you a little flavor of what dancing in San Francisco was like around the late 90s, early 2000s. We literally had 3 dance scenes that were entirely separate, all devoted to Lindy Hop inside San Francisco. You like groove music, you go to that club on Saturday. You was more a lounger, you like dressing up like a swing kid, you wanted to drink some alcohol, you go to another club. There were clubs for all kinds of different fragments. You could go out dancing on Friday night and dance all the way through to Monday morning. On Saturday, you go to the Doghouse, and the Doghouse closed at 1 a.m. You go to the Metronome, and the Metronome closed at 5 a.m. You get some food, and you go Lindy in the Park on Sunday. You go Lindy in the Park, you get a drive at 5, and all on, until you had to show up to work on Monday morning. That's the way the swing scene was. San Francisco is the largest swing scene in the entire world. Some of you may have heard of a club called the DNA Lounge, an electronic club. Swing kids have a special card called a Spencer card. They show up in their neo-swing outfits, flash the card to the bouncer, they get hustle away to a little room in the back, where the DJ called Spencer would be spinning swing tunes. No one swing kids were allowed in. That's how hip Lindy Hop was in the late 90s. Hearing about this sort of scene, the Chicago dancers in late 1998 came out to San Francisco, checked out what the scene was like. Had such a good time, they invited San Francisco out to Chicago. Seattle Cowboys invited people from San Francisco and Chicago out to Seattle, and we began to see an explosion of dance events in different parts of the country, welcoming different styles, bands, all kinds of people, for an exchange of ideas. Those things are still called for the exchanges. San Francisco just had ours. We're about to have Sacramento's in a few weeks. And they're so enormous that at this point you can easily get anywhere from 200 to 600 people per weekend for this sort of thing. You start seeing the internationalization of Lindy Hop. The Harang Dance Camp goes from this tiny, insignificant thing in the middle of Sweden, which is quote-unquote down to the point we double the town size every year. Thousands of Lindy Hoppers come in an entire month to train, to study, and to participate in Lindy Hop culture. And it's also around this time that we start seeing the evolution of new types of dance. Most notably, at the late night exchanges, 5 a.m. after days of dancing, and getting tired and just slow down. And we start seeing close positioning, slow dancing, something called blues. Where does that leave us today? We've managed to take a dance that was completely dead, except for a very small handful of people. This is a dance that grew in a totally impoverished, small area, a small part of the world, and now spread to every inhabited place man's ever gone. We've taken it from the point where we were learning from terribly awful, grainy footage of a few performance routines, not even social dances, where there was no idea how technique worked or connection. We've taken it from the point where you had one person who could tell us anything about what this dance is like. And brought it to 10,000 people around the world. Now, all good things had to come to an end. And if you're going out to San Francisco this weekend, hoping to dance all weekend, that's not going to happen. We still have a very powerful team. But with the loss of growth in some areas, we see incredible blooming elsewhere. The two most prominent swing teams in the world right now, easily eclipsing what San Francisco was at its peak, are in Seoul, Korea, and Melbourne, Australia. Two places that had nothing to do with the early history of Lindy Hop. People who couldn't find Harlem on a map. We're seeing the growth of scenes in Greece, Lithuania. We're seeing the growth in places that we can never expect, and we see it lifting people up everywhere we go. We've gone from something that a few social dancers did and a few jazz geeks and miscellaneous swing enthusiasts did to something where we have events everywhere, where we have components in every part of the world. And I guess the point that I want to leave you with is that this history is very alive. This history is happening right now. And it was built not by a single individual or by a company, by a single group, but by a collection of people who fell in love with this dance and who want to take it forward. And this history has a place in it for each and every one of you.